The radio crackled with static as General Morrison stared at the tactical display, his weathered face illuminated by the amber glow of incoming data streams. 24 hours ago, SEAL Team Delta had vanished into the Zagros Mountains, their last transmission nothing more than fragmented coordinates and the sound of automatic weapons fire. Now, satellite imagery showed enemy forces converging on their position like vultures circling wounded prey. "Sir, F-22 Raptors are holding at Angels 20, awaiting your orders," the communications officer reported, his voice tight with anticipation. The stealth fighters represented America's most advanced aerial warfare capability, invisible death from above, capable of eliminating threats before enemies even knew they were there. It should have been a simple rescue operation. But something felt wrong. Morrison's fingers drummed against the metal console as he studied the terrain below. The mountains stretched endlessly, their jagged peaks creating a maze of shadows and hidden valleys where ground-to-air missiles could lurk undetected. Intelligence reports indicated heavy SAM coverage, but the exact positions remained unknown. One miscalculation could turn the rescue mission into a catastrophe that would dominate headlines for weeks. "General, we have an A-10 requesting permission to approach the combat zone," another voice called out from across the command center. Morrison barely glanced up. The Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog, was a relic from a different era of warfare, built around a massive cannon designed to destroy Soviet tanks during the Cold War. Against modern air defenses, it would be suicide. "Negative. Tell them to maintain their patrol route," Morrison replied curtly. The communications officer hesitated. "Sir, it's Captain Vega, call sign Phoenix, she's persistent." Phoenix. Morrison remembered that name from somewhere but couldn't place it immediately. The mission clock continued its relentless countdown while somewhere in those mountains, elite soldiers were fighting for their lives with dwindling ammunition and no clear extraction route. Every second of delay meant decreased chances of bringing them home alive. The tactical display updated again, showing new enemy movements. Hostile forces were tightening their noose around the SEAL's estimated position, and time was running out. The F-22s possessed overwhelming technological advantages, but they needed precise target identification to avoid catastrophic friendly fire incidents. Without clear visual confirmation of enemy positions, even the world's most advanced fighter jets were reduced to expensive observers. Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a familiar burden. In 30 years of military service, he had learned that the most critical decisions often came down to calculated risks and imperfect information. Tonight would test every lesson he had ever learned about leadership under pressure. The static-filled voice of Phoenix continued requesting permission to engage, her tone growing more urgent with each transmission. Morrison wondered what kind of pilot would volunteer for such a dangerous mission in an aircraft that belonged in a museum rather than a modern battlefield. Captain Isabella Phoenix. Vega had earned her call sign 3 years earlier during a training exercise that went catastrophically wrong. Her A-10 had taken a direct hit from a simulated surface-to-air missile, causing complete hydraulic failure and forcing her to dead-stick the aircraft onto a desert runway with no power controls. The landing had been so smooth that investigators initially suspected the damage reports were exaggerated. She had literally risen from the ashes of what should have been a fatal crash, hence Phoenix. Tonight, as she circled 30 miles from the combat zone, Vega studied the terrain through her night vision system, with the practiced eye of someone who understood that survival often depended on details others missed. The Warthog might lack the sophisticated stealth technology of newer aircraft, but it possessed something more valuable in this situation: the ability to fly low and slow, providing close air support in conditions where faster jets couldn't operate effectively. "Overlord, this is Phoenix requesting immediate clearance to proceed to grid reference 74 Alpha," she transmitted again, her voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. The radio remained silent for several long seconds before General Morrison's voice finally responded. Phoenix, you're flying a 30-year-old attack aircraft into heavily defended airspace. Those mountains are crawling with anti-aircraft systems that will light you up the moment you cross into their envelope. Vega adjusted her flight path slightly, maintaining distance while keeping the target area within sensor range. Sir, with respect, the F-22s can't get low enough to provide effective close air support without risking detection. The SEALs need someone who can get down in the weeds and deal with immediate threats. Negative, Phoenix. Hold your position and await further orders. She toggled her communication system to a different frequency, one monitored by rescue coordination centers. Sometimes indirect approaches worked when direct orders failed. Any station, this is Phoenix. I have eyes on probable SEAL team position and multiple hostile contacts converging on their location. Request immediate clearance to provide close air support. The response came not from the command center but from a faint transmission that barely penetrated the static. Phoenix, this is Delta 6. We are taking heavy fire. Need immediate. Extraction impossible. The transmission dissolved into white noise, but Vega had heard enough. Delta 6 was the SEAL team leader's call sign, and his desperation was evident even through the poor connection. She could visualize the scene. Elite soldiers trapped in defensive positions, ammunition running low, enemy forces closing in from multiple directions. Her hands tightened on the aircraft controls as she made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. General Morrison's orders were clear, but sometimes orders conflicted with the deeper obligations that came with wearing the uniform. Those SEALs had families waiting for them to come home. Vega pushed the throttles forward and banked toward the mountains, her aircraft disappearing into the darkness like a predator hunting for prey. The first indication that something had changed came from the radar operator, whose voice cracked with surprise as he reported an unidentified aircraft moving at high speed toward the combat zone. General Morrison felt his stomach drop as he realized what was happening. Phoenix had disobeyed direct orders and was flying solo into what amounted to a death trap. "Get me a direct line to that aircraft immediately," he barked, his carefully maintained composure finally beginning to fracture. The communications officer worked frantically to establish contact, while Morrison watched the tactical display with growing horror. The single blip representing Phoenix's A-10 was moving steadily toward an area marked with dozens of potential threat indicators. "Phoenix, this is Overlord Actual. You are ordered to abort your current heading and return to base immediately. Acknowledge." Vega's response was professional but unyielding. "Overlord, Phoenix acknowledging your transmission. However, I have positive identification of friendly forces under fire, and am proceeding to provide immediate close air support as per rules of engagement regarding imminent threat to Allied personnel." Morrison recognized the tactical language she was using. Phoenix was invoking protocols that allowed field commanders to act independently when friendly forces were in immediate danger, and communication with higher authority was impractical. It was a legal gray area that gave her just enough justification to continue her mission. "Captain, you are flying into a SAM trap. Intelligence indicates at least 6 separate anti-aircraft installations in that valley." "Copy that, Overlord. Phoenix is equipped for SAM suppression and has visual contact with enemy positions." The confidence in her voice was almost convincing, but Morrison knew the reality of what she was facing. The A-10 might be tough, but it wasn't invulnerable. One lucky shot from a shoulder-fired missile could turn her aircraft into burning wreckage scattered across the mountainside. He found himself caught between competing obligations, protecting his pilots from unnecessary risks while ensuring that trapped SEALs received the support they desperately needed. The F-22s remained on station, their advanced sensors providing detailed intelligence about enemy movements, but they couldn't engage targets without risking catastrophic collateral damage in the confined valley where the SEALs were trapped. Phoenix, meanwhile, continued her approach with the methodical precision of someone who had spent countless hours training for exactly this scenario. Her aircraft might be old, but it had been designed specifically for close air support missions in hostile environments. As she crossed into enemy airspace, Vega began her descent toward the valley floor, using terrain features to mask her approach from radar installations. The first surface-to-air missile launched when Phoenix was still 12 miles from the SEAL position, its exhaust trail clearly visible against the starlit sky as it arced upward from a ridge line to the east. Vega spotted the launch immediately and began evasive maneuvers, deploying chaff and flares while pulling her aircraft into a tight spiral that would have challenged pilots half her age. The missile passed harmlessly behind her, but 3 more launches followed in rapid succession from different positions. The enemy had been waiting for exactly this kind of intervention, and their trap was more sophisticated than intelligence reports had indicated. Multiple SAM launches, multiple SAM launches. Vega transmitted while fighting to maintain control of her aircraft during extreme maneuvering. The A-10's robust construction allowed it to withstand G-forces that would tear apart more delicate aircraft, but even the Warthog had limits. "Phoenix, get out of there." Morrison's voice carried genuine concern now, professional distance replaced by human worry for a pilot under fire. Instead of retreating, Vega rolled inverted and dove toward the valley floor, using the mountainous terrain to break radar lock from the remaining SAM sites. Her altitude dropped to less than 200 feet above ground level, forcing the enemy to cease missile attacks or risk destroying their own positions with proximity detonations. Flying at that altitude in mountainous terrain required absolute precision and split-second timing. One miscalculation would send her aircraft slamming into a cliff face at over 300 miles per hour, but it also meant she could now see the battle unfolding below with her own eyes. The SEALs had taken position in a small clearing, surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided some cover from small arms fire, but enemy forces were advancing from 3 directions simultaneously. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies as automatic weapons exchanged bursts of fire. "Delta 6, this is Phoenix. I have eyes on your position and am beginning my attack run." The SEAL team leader's response was barely audible over the sound of nearby explosions. "Phoenix, we are critically low on ammunition and have 2 wounded. Enemy forces approximately 50 meters to our north, east, and south." Vega lined up her first attack run, the massive GAU-8 cannon built into her aircraft's nose ready to deliver devastating firepower. The 30 rounds could penetrate armored vehicles and would make short work of infantry positions, but she needed to be absolutely certain of her targets to avoid hitting friendly forces. The engagement was about to begin in earnest. Vega's first pass was a masterpiece of precision flying. She approached from the west, using a narrow canyon to mask her approach until the last possible moment. When she finally pulled up over the ridge line, her aircraft was less than 100 feet above the enemy positions, close enough to see individual soldiers diving for cover. The GAU-8 cannon spoke with its distinctive voice, a deep, resonating buzz that sounded like giant canvas being torn apart. Each burst sent dozens of depleted uranium rounds downrange at nearly 4,000 feet per second, turning concealed positions into clouds of dirt and debris. Her first attack run eliminated an entire squad of enemy fighters who had been advancing on the SEALs from the north. The survivors scattered, seeking whatever cover they could find, but Vega was already banking around for her second pass. "Good effect on target, Phoenix," Delta 6 reported. "Enemy forces to the north have been neutralized. We still have contacts to the east and south." Vega acknowledged the transmission while setting up her next attack run. The eastern position would be more challenging because of its proximity to the SEAL team's location, requiring even greater precision to avoid friendly fire incidents. As she approached from a different angle, enemy tracers began reaching up toward her aircraft. The green streaks of light looked deceptively slow from her perspective, but each round was traveling at lethal velocity. Several impacts sparked off her aircraft's armored cockpit, producing spider web cracks in the reinforced glass. The A-10 had been designed to absorb battle damage and continue fighting, its redundant systems and armored crew compartment providing protection that newer, lighter aircraft couldn't match. Even so, Vega felt each impact like a personal assault. Her second attack run was equally devastating. The cannon's depleted uranium rounds tearing through enemy positions with surgical precision. The distinctive sound of the GAU-8 echoed off the valley walls like thunder, announcing to everyone within miles that the Warthog had arrived. "Phoenix, enemy contacts to the south are withdrawing," Delta 6 reported. "Your presence has definitely shifted the tactical balance. We need immediate extraction while we have this window of opportunity." Vega circled the area, maintaining overwatch while scanning for any remaining threats. The immediate danger had passed, but enemy reinforcements would undoubtedly be en route to the area. "Overlord, this is Phoenix. Enemy forces have been neutralized and SEAL team is requesting immediate extraction. Recommend sending and rescue birds while we have clear airspace." General Morrison's response carried a mixture of relief and professional respect. "Phoenix, outstanding work. Extraction birds are airborne and will be on station in 15 minutes." The rescue helicopters arrived exactly on schedule, their pilots guided by Phoenix's position reports and illumination flares. The extraction was completed without incident. All 6 SEALs successfully recovered, along with valuable intelligence materials they had gathered during their mission. As Vega finally turned her battered A-10 toward home, she reflected on the night's events. The aircraft had performed flawlessly despite taking multiple hits, and the mission had been successful beyond all expectations. But she knew there would be consequences for her decision to disobey direct orders, regardless of the positive outcome. The debriefing took place in a sterile conference room at Bagram Airfield, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the faces of assembled officers. General Morrison sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he reviewed the mission reports that had been compiled throughout the night. Captain Vega entered the room with the measured stride of someone who understood that her military career hung in the balance. She wore a fresh flight suit, the previous night's combat gear having been turned over to maintenance crews who were still cataloging the battle damage to her aircraft. "Captain, please take a seat," Morrison said, gesturing to the chair directly across from him. The formal tone suggested this was not going to be a casual conversation. The other officers present included the wing commander, the intelligence chief, and a legal representative whose presence indicated that disciplinary action was being considered. Vega had faced similar situations before, but never after disobeying direct orders from a general officer. "Let's start with the basics," Morrison began. "At approximately 21:30 hours yesterday, you were given explicit orders to maintain your patrol route and not enter the combat zone. Yet at 21:42 hours, you proceeded directly into hostile airspace without authorization. Do you dispute these facts?" "No, sir, those facts are accurate." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her face for any sign of defiance or regret. What he saw instead was calm professionalism mixed with quiet confidence. "Captain, help me understand your thought process. What made you believe that you had the authority to countermand direct orders from theater command?" Vega had prepared for this question during the long flight back to base. Her answer needed to be both legally defensible and personally honest. "Sir, Row Section 4.2.7 states that field commanders may act independently to prevent imminent loss of life when communication delays would compromise mission effectiveness. I assessed that the SEAL team was in immediate danger and that the F-22s on station were unable to provide effective close air support due to terrain constraints and proximity to friendly forces. The legal representative made notes while Morrison continued his questioning. Captain, you had no way of knowing whether your intervention would be successful or whether you might actually make the situation worse. What if you had been shot down? What if your attack runs had resulted in friendly fire casualties? Sir, I conducted detailed reconnaissance before engaging and maintained constant communication with Delta 6 throughout the engagement to ensure positive target identification. As for the risk to my aircraft and myself, she paused, choosing her words carefully. That's why they pay us to fly these missions. The room fell silent for several moments. Morrison found himself remembering his own days as a young officer, when the weight of command decisions seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. Phoenix had made exactly the kind of split-second judgment call that separated exceptional officers from merely competent ones. Captain, the SEAL team leader submitted a formal report recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. He credits your actions with saving 6 lives and recovering critical intelligence that has already led to 3 successful follow-up operations. Vega's expression didn't change, but Morrison noticed her shoulders relax slightly. The investigation into Phoenix's unauthorized mission continued for 3 more days, during which time her A-10 underwent extensive repairs, and she remained grounded pending the final decision on disciplinary action. The damaged aircraft served as a silent testament to the violence she had encountered: 37 bullet holes, 2 cracked canopy panels, and hydraulic lines that had been severed by shrapnel. Captain Vega used the enforced downtime to write detailed after-action reports and attend intelligence briefings about the enemy tactics encountered during the engagement. The information she had gathered during her low-level passes proved invaluable for future mission planning. On the 4th day, she was summoned to General Morrison's private office rather than the formal conference room. This time, she found him standing beside a large window that overlooked the flight line, watching maintenance crews service the various aircraft that formed the backbone of coalition air operations. "Close the door, Captain," he said without turning around. Vega complied and then stood at attention until Morrison gestured for her to take a seat in one of the leather chairs positioned near his desk. The informality suggested that the disciplinary phase of their interaction had concluded. "I've been thinking about your case for the past 72 hours, Morrison began, finally turning away from the window. "On one hand, you clearly disobeyed direct orders from a superior officer, which is a court-martial offense under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. On the other hand, your actions directly resulted in saving 6 American lives and recovering intelligence that has strategic value for ongoing operations." Vega remained silent, understanding that Morrison was working through a complex decision that would establish precedent for similar situations in the future. "I've reviewed your service record extensively. Distinguished graduate from the Air Force Academy, top 10% of pilot training, multiple combat deployments, and an unblemished record of professionalism. Until 3 nights ago." Morrison walked to his desk and picked up a folder that contained what appeared to be official documents. "I could end your career right here, right now. One signature and you'd be facing court-martial proceedings that would likely result in dismissal from the service." The weight of those words settled over the room like a physical presence. Vega had known the risks when she made her decision, but hearing them stated so bluntly drove home the magnitude of what was at stake. "However," Morrison continued, "I believe that exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional decisions. The SEALs are alive because you were willing to risk your career and your life to do what you believed was right. He opened the folder and removed a single document. This is a letter of reprimand that will be placed in your permanent record. It formally documents your violation of direct orders, but it's also accompanied by a recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross and immediate promotion to Major. Vega felt her world shift slightly as she processed this unexpected outcome. A letter of reprimand would affect her career progression, but the DFC and promotion indicated that her actions had been recognized as heroic rather than simply insubordinate. The ceremony took place on a blazing hot afternoon in front of the entire wing, with personnel formation stretching across the tarmac in precise rows. Major Isabella Vega stood at attention as General Morrison read the citation for her Distinguished Flying Cross, his voice carrying clearly over the assembled crowd, despite the constant background noise of aircraft operations. For extraordinary heroism in aerial combat against enemy forces, Major Vega displayed exceptional courage and skill in single-handedly engaging multiple enemy positions, while providing close air support to surrounded friendly forces. Her actions directly resulted in the successful rescue of 6 personnel and the recovery of critical intelligence materials. The medal itself was surprisingly heavy as Morrison pinned it to her uniform, the ribbon's distinctive blue and red stripes adding another splash of color to the collection she had earned over 12 years of service. But it was the handshake that followed that carried the most meaning, a gesture of professional respect from an officer who had initially questioned her judgment. After the ceremony, Vega found herself surrounded by fellow pilots and ground crew members who wanted to congratulate her and hear first-hand accounts of the mission. The attention was both gratifying and slightly overwhelming for someone who had always preferred to let her actions speak louder than her words. "Ma'am, could you tell us about the low-level run through the canyon?" asked a young lieutenant who was scheduled to begin A-10 training the following month. "The intelligence reports said you were flying at less than 50 feet above ground level." Vega smiled at the eager expression on his face, remembering her own days as a new pilot when experienced aviators had seemed like mythical figures. The key is knowing your aircraft's capabilities and limitations. The Warthog might be old, but it's still the best close air support platform ever built. You just have to respect what it can and can't do. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering everything from tactical decision-making to aircraft systems management. Vega found herself enjoying the teaching aspect of senior leadership, sharing lessons learned through years of experience with the next generation of pilots. As the crowd gradually dispersed, she noticed Delta 6 approaching from across the tarmac. The SEAL team leader looked different in his dress uniform. The rugged operator she had briefly glimpsed through night vision now revealed as a surprisingly young man whose decorations indicated extensive combat experience. "Major, I wanted to thank you personally," he said, extending his hand. "My team and I owe you our lives." Vega shook his hand, nodding the firm grip and direct eye contact that spoke of genuine gratitude. "Just doing my job, Sergeant Major. I'm glad everyone made it home safely." "It was more than just doing your job, ma'am. What you did required the kind of courage that most people never have to face." The formal presentation of her Distinguished Flying Cross made headlines in military publications and social media posts, but the real recognition came from sources that mattered more to Vega personally. Her parents called from New Mexico to express their pride, her voice cracking slightly as they tried to comprehend the magnitude of what their daughter had accomplished. Former instructors from pilot training reached out to congratulate her, sharing the message with current students as an example of what exceptional airmanship could achieve. The Air Force Academy requested permission to use her story in leadership courses, illustrating the complex decisions that officers must make when regulations conflict with moral imperatives. But perhaps most meaningful was the letter she received from the wife of one of the rescued SEALs, a handwritten note that simply said, "Thank you for bringing my husband home to our children." Vega kept that letter in her flight suit pocket during subsequent missions, a tangible reminder of why she had chosen military service as her career. The strategic implications of her mission were important, but the human cost of failure would have been devastating for families who were already sacrificing so much. Her promotion to major came with new responsibilities, including oversight of combat training programs for incoming A-10 pilots. The position allowed her to share tactical knowledge gained through real-world experience while helping to prepare the next generation for the challenges they would face in combat environments. The training scenarios she developed were notably realistic, incorporating lessons learned from her unauthorized rescue mission, along with insights gathered from other combat veterans throughout the wing. Students complained about the difficulty level, but their survival rates during actual combat deployments improved measurably. 6 months after the rescue mission, Vega received an unexpected assignment to the Pentagon, where she would serve as a liaison officer between Air Combat Command and Special Operations Command. The position was a clear indication that her career was progressing toward senior leadership roles despite the letter of reprimand in her permanent record. Her final flight in the A-10 was a bittersweet experience, the familiar aircraft responding to her inputs like an old friend who understood her intentions before she could fully articulate them. She had logged over 2,000 combat hours in various warthogs, each mission adding to her reputation as one of the most skilled close air support pilots in the Air Force. As she climbed out of the cockpit for the last time, Vega ran her hand along the aircraft's armored fuselage, feeling the patches where battle damage had been repaired and metal replaced. The A-10 might be approaching the end of its service life, but it had proven once again that superior technology couldn't always substitute for pilot skill and determination. The going-away party organized by her squadron was a raucous affair that lasted well into the night, with stories and toasts that grew increasingly embellished as the evening progressed. But the sentiment behind the celebration was genuine. Phoenix had become a legend within the close air support community, and her departure represented the end of an era. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who had been promoted and reassigned to a staff position at Air Combat Command Headquarters, attended the party specifically to bid farewell to the pilot who had challenged his authority and ultimately proven herself right. Their relationship had evolved from adversarial to mutually respectful, a professional bond forged through shared commitment to mission success. Years later, when military historians analyzed the tactical innovations that characterized early 21st century combat operations, Major Vega's unauthorized rescue mission would be cited as a perfect example of how individual initiative could overcome institutional limitations. The mission became required study material at the Air Force Academy and the Army War College, dissected by students who would never face similar life-and-death decisions. But for the SEALs she had rescued that night, the academic analysis mattered less than the simple fact that Phoenix had been willing to risk everything for strangers who needed help. Delta 6 eventually retired from active duty and became a high school teacher in Colorado, but he never forgot the sound of the A-10's cannon echoing through the valley darkness. The intelligence recovered during the mission led to the disruption of 3 separate terrorist networks and prevented at least 2 planned attacks on coalition bases. The strategic impact extended far beyond the immediate rescue operation, validating Morrison's eventual conclusion that sometimes disobedience in service of a greater good represented the highest form of military professionalism. Major Vega's Pentagon assignment introduced her to the complex political and budgetary considerations that drove military decision-making at the highest levels. The experience was both enlightening and occasionally frustrating, as she discovered that combat effectiveness often took second priority to congressional politics and defense contractor interests. Her reputation as the pilot who had single-handedly rescued an entire SEAL team opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed, allowing her to advocate for programs and policies that would benefit tactical aircrew. She testified before congressional subcommittees about the continued value of the A-10 program, using her combat experience to counter arguments that the aircraft was obsolete. The briefings she prepared for senior Pentagon officials always included references to real-world combat scenarios, grounding abstract policy discussions in the practical realities faced by aircrews operating in hostile environments. Her PowerPoint presentations became legendary for their combination of technical accuracy and compelling narrative structure. After 2 years in Washington, Colonel Vega, her promotion had come through ahead of schedule, received command of an entire A-10 squadron based in Arizona. The assignment represented both a homecoming and a culmination of her career progression, placing her in charge of the same type of aircraft that had made her famous. Her change of command ceremony drew attendees from across the Air Force, including several of the SEALs she had rescued years earlier. Delta 6, now a civilian, traveled from Colorado specifically to witness Phoenix taking command of her own unit. "It's fitting that you're leading other Warthog drivers," he told her after the ceremony. "Your example will inspire them to take the kind of risks that save lives." Vega accepted the compliment gracefully, but privately she hoped that her squadron would never face the same impossible choices that had defined her most famous mission. Good leadership meant creating conditions where subordinates could succeed without having to choose between following orders and saving lives. The squadron she inherited had been struggling with morale problems and maintenance issues, challenges that required different skills than those needed for combat flying. Colonel Vega approached these problems with the same systematic thoroughness that had characterized her approach to tactical flying, identifying root causes rather than treating symptoms. Within 6 months, her unit had the highest readiness rates in the wing and was being held up as a model for other struggling squadrons. The transformation was achieved through attention to detail, personal leadership, and an unwavering commitment to the standards that had made Phoenix a legend among A-10 pilots. Her office wall displayed the Distinguished Flying Cross alongside photographs from various combat deployments, but the most prominent item was a simple wooden plaque inscribed with the call signs of every pilot who had served under her command. The list grew longer each year as new aviators earned their wings and joined the close air support community. Phoenix had evolved from a talented individual pilot into a leader who multiplied her effectiveness through the achievements of others, her influence extending far beyond any single combat mission. The final chapter of Colonel Vega's active duty career began with her selection for promotion to Brigadier General, making her one of the youngest female general officers in Air Force history. The ceremony took place at the Pentagon, with her parents and the surviving members of Delta 6 in attendance to witness this capstone achievement. General Morrison, now a 3-star general serving as Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, had the honor of administering the oath of office that formally elevated Phoenix to the general officer ranks. Their relationship had come full circle, from antagonistic disagreement to mutual respect to professional collaboration. "Isabella, when you disobeyed my orders 15 years ago, I thought you were either crazy or dangerously reckless," Morrison said during his remarks at the promotion ceremony. "I was wrong on both counts. You were simply ahead of your time in understanding that sometimes the right decision requires the courage to act despite institutional resistance." The audience, a mixture of Pentagon staff officers, congressional representatives, and combat veterans, responded with sustained applause that reflected both the significance of the moment and recognition of Phoenix's unique journey to general officer rank. Brigadier General Vega's first assignment was as Director of Air Force Combat Operations, a position that placed her at the center of global military planning and crisis response. The role required her to think strategically about air power employment, while never losing sight of the tactical realities faced by aircrews executing her decisions. Her staff officers quickly learned that Phoenix brought a different perspective to strategic planning, one informed by personal experience with the life-and-death consequences of operational decisions. Briefings that might have remained abstract academic exercises under previous leadership became concrete discussions about how to achieve mission success while minimizing risk to personnel. The first major crisis of her tenure involved a terrorist attack on a coalition outpost in Syria, with dozens of personnel trapped by hostile forces and requiring immediate extraction. The situation bore uncomfortable similarities to the SEAL rescue mission that had made her famous, but this time she was responsible for making the strategic decisions rather than executing them. General Vega found herself in Morrison's position from years earlier, weighing the risks of authorizing a dangerous rescue operation against the potential cost of losing American lives to institutional caution. The irony of the situation was not lost on her, as she studied intelligence reports and consulted with tactical commanders about available options. The rescue operation she ultimately authorized employed lessons learned from her own experience, with multiple aircraft types working in coordinated fashion to provide both high-altitude overwatch and low-level close air support. The mission succeeded with no friendly casualties, validating the tactical innovations that had emerged from her unauthorized intervention years earlier. Phoenix had become the institutional leader she had once challenged, using her position to ensure that future generations of pilots would have the support and authorization needed to save lives without having to choose between duty and morality. 25 years after her retirement from active duty, General Isabella Phoenix Vega was inducted into the Air Force Hall of Fame, her career serving as an inspiration for countless aviators who had followed in her path. The ceremony took place at the National Museum of the United States Air Force, with an A-10 Thunderbolt II serving as the backdrop for speeches honoring her contributions to military aviation. Her acceptance speech was characteristically modest, focusing on the achievements of the aircrews she had led rather than her own accomplishments. But she did take a moment to reflect on the night that had defined her career, when a young captain had made a split-second decision that would echo through decades of military history. The most important lesson I learned during my career is that technology and tactics are meaningless without the human courage to employ them effectively, she told the assembled audience. We train extensively, we plan meticulously, and we equip ourselves with the finest weapons ever created. But in the end, mission success depends on individuals who are willing to risk everything for their fellow warriors. In the audience, now retired Command Sergeant Major Delta 6 listened with tears in his eyes, remembering a night when the sound of an A-10's cannon had meant the difference between life and death for him and his team. His own children, now adults, understood that their father's survival had depended on the courage of a pilot they had never met but would always remember. The museum exhibit dedicated to Phoenix's career included artifacts from her famous rescue mission, fragments of the enemy weapons destroyed during her attack runs, pieces of her aircraft's damaged canopy, and the original citation for her distinguished flying cross. But the centerpiece was a simple audio recording of the radio transmissions from that night, preserved for posterity as an example of American military excellence under pressure. Visitors to the exhibit often stood in silence as they listened to the calm professionalism in Phoenix's voice as she coordinated the rescue operation, her words carrying across the decades as a testament to the values that defined the finest military officers of her generation. The inscription beneath her portrait read simply, Brigadier General Isabella Vega, USAF Ret. Phoenix. When others hesitated, she acted. When others feared, she flew. When others failed, she succeeded. But perhaps the most fitting memorial was not found in any museum or written in any official history. It existed in the stories passed down through generations of A-10 pilots, each one adding their own details to the legend of Phoenix, and the night she proved that individual courage could still change the course of history. New pilots arriving at their first operational assignments would inevitably hear about Phoenix during their initial briefings, the tale serving as both inspiration and instruction about the standards expected of those who flew the Warthog. The story had evolved over time, gaining mythic qualities that sometimes obscured the human decisions that had made it possible. Yet at its core, the legend remained true to the facts. When American lives hung in the balance, a pilot had chosen to risk everything rather than accept defeat. That choice had saved 6 lives directly and countless others indirectly through the intelligence recovered and the precedent established. The night sky over the Zagros Mountains had witnessed many battles throughout history, but none more significant than the engagement between one determined pilot and the forces of darkness that threatened to extinguish the light of liberty. Phoenix had flown into that darkness without hesitation, her aircraft's cannon blazing like a star fallen to earth. In the end, that was her legacy, the willingness to act when action was required.